I am Piper Anderson, 34 years old, born and raised in the state of Ohio. In the eyes of neighbors and relatives, I was always the model child, the eldest daughter my parents could rely on at any moment. They often bragged that I was independent, strong, always planning for the future. But behind those compliments was a bitter truth. I was expected to fend for myself, while my younger sister, Emily, was constantly pampered and cared for in every detail of her life. Since high school, the favoritism was obvious. I worked part-time at a bakery and a restaurant to save money for my college dream. Emily, meanwhile, had her entire tuition at a prestigious private school fully paid for by our parents. I remember it vividly. At 19, I finally saved enough to buy a used silver gray car, my small badge of pride after 2 years of saving. But just a year later, when Emily turned 16, our parents surprised her with a brand new car at her birthday party. Everyone clapped and cheered while I forced a smile, swallowing the injustice in silence. Whenever I tried to point out the differences, my mother, Carol, would always reply in the same familiar tone, "Piper, you're stronger and more independent. Emily needs more help than you." It sounded like praise, but in reality it was more like invisible handcuffs, chaining me to the role of the one who endured, who sacrificed. Meanwhile, Emily only needed to complete the smallest tasks to be praised as if she had conquered the world. On the day I graduated college with honors, my parents came, but they left early, saying they had to help Emily move into her new apartment in New York. I stood in the middle of the campus lawn, holding flowers and my diploma, wondering why my effort was never enough for them to stay with me for one whole day. At 26, when I got my very first promotion at work, my parents agreed to host a family dinner to celebrate. Yet halfway through the meal, the conversation quickly shifted to Emily's upcoming wedding. I sat quietly, watching every eye turn toward her, while my achievement was brushed aside like a trivial detail. Even knowing how overlooked I was, I still tried to maintain ties with the family. I was the one who picked up the phone no matter what time they called, even at midnight. When Emily and her husband, Mark, faced financial troubles, I was the one who paid their rent for 3 consecutive months. When my nephew Jacob was diagnosed with learning difficulties, I spent weeks researching and contacting specialized schools. Nobody asked me to, but it was assumed I would do it, because I was the reliable one. My father, Richard, often proudly told relatives that I was just like him, hardworking and never complaining. Each time I heard him say it, I smiled on the outside, but inside it stung. My silence wasn't because I felt no pain. It was because I had grown used to my voice carrying no weight in this family. Emily, 6 years younger than me, was the complete opposite. She had the uncanny ability to make people soften even when she was the one causing trouble. She quit her first job after just a few months because it wasn't the right environment. Instead of being upset, my parents gave her money to start an online business. When that business failed, they comforted her. "You tried your best, and that's what matters." Hearing that felt like a thorn lodged in my throat. I had failed many times too, but never once did I receive such gentle consolation. My youth passed in that stark contrast. I worked hard, took care of myself, and even supported the family. Emily, on the other hand, only had to breathe to be celebrated. At some point, I realized I wasn't truly seen as a daughter, but more like a pillar holding the family up. By the time I turned 30, after another major step forward in my career, I hoped my parents would finally see me differently. But even at the small party I invited them to, my mother cleverly steered the entire conversation into a planning session about Emily wanting to move into a bigger apartment. I took a sip of wine, swallowing my hurt. By then, I had become all too familiar with that pattern. When I turned 31, life seemed to be opening an entirely new chapter. I was promoted to project director at a tech company in Columbus, a position I had worked nearly 10 years to achieve. My salary doubled, with stock options and a private office overlooking the heart of the city. I still remember the feeling of sitting in that swivel chair for the first time, gazing at the city lights shimmering through the glass wall. It was both pride and confirmation that all my effort and patience had not been wasted. I hoped my parents would be proud just once. I texted my mother, "I was just promoted." The whole company held a celebration for me. Her reply came half an hour later, "That's good, Piper. Oh, by the way, are you free next week? Emily needs someone to watch the kids because she's busy preparing for an art gallery event." Reading that, I laughed bitterly. I had just achieved the biggest milestone of my career, yet all they could think about was Emily and her 2 children. At 28, Emily was married to Mark, a man my parents always praised as a caring husband and father, even though he switched jobs constantly. Emily pursued art, running a small gallery in Cincinnati. The gallery barely stayed afloat, but my parents saw it as a brave step of an artistic soul. They didn't hesitate to pour in more money to help her rent a new space, while I had scraped and saved every dollar through college on my own. The favoritism didn't stop there. When I invited the family for dinner at my new apartment, hoping they would recognize what I had achieved after years of saving, my mother merely glanced around, nodded, and said, "Emily is also thinking about moving into a bigger place. Piper, see if you know anyone who could rent her a good apartment at a fair price." I was stunned. The apartment I bought with my sweat and sacrifice became nothing more than an excuse to compare me with Emily, and once again the story turned back to her. The harder I tried, the more invisible I became in their eyes. Emily, meanwhile, was forever cushioned. Even her smallest failures were sugar-coated. When her art show fell apart due to low attendance, my father put his arm around her and said, "You have talent, the market just isn't ready yet." But when I once failed a project, his only comment was that I needed to work even harder. To them, Emily deserved protection while I only deserved dry reminders. The gap was even more obvious during the holidays. That Christmas, I bought my parents a luxury leather chair set they had long wanted. I had saved for months to afford it. They smiled when they saw it, but immediately shifted all their attention to the handmade gift Emily brought, a sunflower painting still wet with paint. "This is beautiful, Emily," my mother exclaimed. "So soulful, sweetheart." The whole living room filled with praise, while the expensive gift I had chosen sat forgotten in the corner, as if it never existed. I remember that moment vividly, the feeling of being an outsider in my own home. I was no longer a daughter, just a servant providing and never acknowledged. Worst of all, Emily never seemed to notice the distance. She cheerfully talked about her new plans, her dream apartment, her next exhibition, all while my parents hung on every word, encouraging her as if she was destined for greatness. One night, during my father's birthday dinner, I decided to finally speak up. I said, "Sometimes I feel forgotten. Everything I achieve never seems to matter as much as what Emily does." My father chuckled, patting my shoulder. "Piper, you're strong. You don't need praise. Your sister is different. She needs encouragement to keep going." That careless statement hit me like a blow. My so-called strength had become their excuse to ignore my feelings altogether. That night, back in my apartment alone, I sat by the window for hours, staring down at the streets lit with countless lights. I wondered how many more years I would have to wait to see pride in my parents' eyes. Or was I destined to live my whole life as nothing more than the shadow standing behind my sister? And yet, deep inside, another fire began to rise. I started to realize I couldn't keep waiting for recognition from people who never wanted to see me. I had come too far to turn back, and I was strong enough now to rewrite my own role. When I turned 33, I knew I was standing at a crossroads I had never dared to dream of in my younger years. After more than a year as project director, I was promoted to vice president of strategic development at the tech corporation I had dedicated nearly 12 years to. This promotion was not just a ticket into the executive circle, but it also gave me an income large enough to fulfill a dream I had carried since my college days. Years earlier, during a business trip to France, I had fallen in love with the old stone houses scattered across the endless vineyards of Provence. Back then, I promised myself that one day I would own a peaceful haven like that, a home no one could dismiss or take away from me. It wasn't just about architecture. It was about proving my own worth. That September, an unexpected opportunity appeared. A stone villa more than 200 years old was listed for sale on a hillside outside Aix-en-Provence. It came with olive groves, a terrace paved with ancient stones, and wide windows overlooking a sunlit valley. I didn't hesitate. After years of saving and planning, I signed the contract. Holding the keys in my hand, my heart pounded as if I had just reclaimed a long-lost part of myself. I named it Villa Solace, a place of comfort, a sanctuary to heal the scars etched into me since childhood. Still, I didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to keep it a secret because deep down I hoped Thanksgiving would be the moment I proudly unveiled it. I pictured the family gathered together, me showing photos of the villa, and for the first time, seeing my parents' eyes light up with genuine pride for me. In my mind, I had already arranged the scene in vivid detail. like a film waiting to be played for my loved ones. While I advanced, Emily continued to stumble. Her gallery opened and closed within months, then reopened in a different location. Her husband, Mark, kept bouncing from job to job. My parents poured their energy into supporting them, even pitching in money for Mark to try running a small coffee shop. I only learned about it when I called my mother to check in, and she casually explained, "Oh, we just want to help them stay on their feet. You don't need anything, you're too stable already." I said nothing, but inside another cut was made. What did too stable even mean? I was their daughter too. Didn't stability deserve celebration? That October, while preparing for a long business trip, I secretly flew to France to see the villa. The old house was breathtaking. Each stone wall, each pane of glass, each worn step seemed to whisper centuries of stories. I walked into the high-ceilinged living room with its massive fireplace and imagined the day I would sit there with my family, laughter filling the space. I spent 3 days exploring every corner, photographing each detail. Those pictures I kept on my phone, waiting to reveal them at Thanksgiving like a gift. On the flight back to the United States, I smiled to myself, convinced that this time I had the perfect chance to prove I was worthy of my parents' pride. Yet beneath that hope lingered a quiet fear. I knew my family had never truly valued what I did. They might glance at the villa photos only to quickly turn the conversation back to Emily's next plan. I hated that doubt, but I couldn't shake it. I told myself, if my parents never change, then at least I would give myself a new beginning. Villa Solace wasn't just proof for them. It was proof for me that I had the strength to build a world of my own, free from favoritism and comparison. As Thanksgiving drew near, my excitement grew. I had prepared a small presentation, chosen the most beautiful photos to print, and even wrapped an album as a gift for my parents. I was certain that when they saw it, they wouldn't be able to overlook me anymore. It was Tuesday morning, less than 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was preparing for a big presentation when my phone buzzed. My mother's name, Carol, lit up the screen. I smiled faintly, expecting she wanted to discuss the holiday dinner or ask what dish I'd bring. But no. When I opened the message, it felt like a bucket of ice water hit my chest. "Piper, your father and I talked it over. This year we want a peaceful Thanksgiving with just Emily and her family. Maybe you could skip it. We need space. Hope you understand. Love you." I read it again and again. Each word cut deeper than a knife. Skip it this year. Did they realize what they were excluding me from? Thanksgiving had always been our most sacred family tradition. In that moment, shock and heartbreak crashed through me like a collapse inside my chest. I set the phone down and stared at my laptop, unable to see a single word on the screen. Memories surged forward. 17 years old, coming home from a shift at the bakery only to jump into the kitchen to help Mom while Emily painted her nails. 25, exhausted from work yet still rushing over to babysit so Emily could go out. Past holidays where I bought wine, flowers, and gifts but no one noticed. All of it came flooding back. Peaceful. That word lodged in my throat. Did my presence mean chaos? I was the one who never made a scene, the one who cleaned up after everyone else. And space. Space from me, from my very existence. For 34 years I had been blind to the truth. In my parents' eyes I was never essential. That entire meeting I sat like a shadow, hearing others present while my mind was hollow. Afterward I slumped in a hallway chair, hands trembling. A few lines of text weighed heavier than any argument. They confirmed what I had always feared. I was nothing more than a support beam, while Emily was the centerpiece. In anger I drafted messages. If I don't matter, then don't expect me to cover Emily's rent anymore. Delete. After all I've sacrificed, this is how you repay me? Delete. My fingers shook, palms damp with sweat. Then I heard my therapist's voice in my head. Larson had once told me, "You can't control how they act. You can only control your response." So I erased everything and typed just one word: enjoy. I pressed send and leaned my head against the wall. One short word that might look careless, but it carried all the strength I had left. No blame. No pleading. Just the end of endless sacrifices no one ever saw. That evening I stood on my balcony watching the lights of Columbus glow below. The pain was sharp, but alongside it was a strange relief. Maybe this was the excuse I needed to stop begging for something that was never mine. I had Villa Solace. I had my career. I had the power to create a life not built on their approval. Still, I refused to bury the hurt. I would turn it into something new. Opening my notebook, I scribbled, Thanksgiving, Villa Solace. Below, I listed names of people who truly cared: Aunt Ruth, my mother's sister who had always been my rock; Uncle Kyle and his wife from Iowa who never failed to encourage me; and close friends like Haley, a former colleague. I pictured a long table inside that stone villa, laughter echoing, no one waiting in the shadows for a scrap of recognition. That text tore down my illusions, but it also opened a door. For the first time in my life, I was ready to write my own tradition. And my parents, Linda and Richard, would eventually see the consequences of a choice they themselves had made. That night, after sending the message "Enjoy," I sat in silence for hours on my apartment balcony, autumn wind weaving through my hair. I knew I couldn't let this Thanksgiving become an empty void. If my parents had cast me aside, then I would create my own table, my own tradition, surrounded only by those who truly valued my presence. The thought warmed my chest. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the photos I had taken of Villa Solace during my recent trip. The gray stone walls, the ivy-covered terrace, the olive fields stretching behind, all of it seemed to wait for me to breathe in new life. I imagined the wide kitchen glowing with firelight, the scent of roasted turkey mingling with red wine, and laughter echoing through the long stone-floored dining room. The first person I called was Aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister, 60 years old, a psychology professor in Portland. She had always seen through the unfairness in my family, often urging me not to sacrifice myself too much. When she heard I had been cut out of Thanksgiving, she was quiet for a long time, then said slowly, "Piper, this year let yourself be at the center. If you truly want to host your own dinner, I'll be there. No matter where it is." Her words felt like a jolt of strength. I immediately made a list of relatives and friends who had stood by me in hard times. Uncle Kyle and his wife in Iowa, my cousins Dylan and Sophie, the ones I had grown up with every summer at our grandparents' house, along with a few close friends like Haley and Marcus from work. I didn't want a noisy crowd. I wanted a gathering where every glance carried respect. In the days that followed, I reached out one by one. Each call left me surprised and moved. Sophie squealed over the phone, "Thanksgiving in France? Piper, do you realize you just saved us from another night of listening to Mom and Dad complain? I'm booking my ticket now." Dylan laughed heartily, "Never thought you'd go this bold. But you're right. If family doesn't want us, we make a new one." Haley, my closest college friend, now a designer in Chicago, thought I was joking at first. When I sent photos of the villa, she went silent, then replied with her voice trembling, "Piper, you've hidden yourself too long. This is the moment everyone sees how radiant you really are. I'm coming no matter what." Each time someone agreed, I felt like another missing piece of my life was put into place. Villa Solace was no longer a private dream, but a stage for a turning point. I hired a local manager in Aix-en-Provence for support. His name was Laurent, about 50, and he knew every corner of the region. He suggested extra guest beds, stocking the kitchen with local treasures: black truffles, Bandol wine, cheeses from nearby farms. I agreed to it all, so exhilarated I lay awake for nights on end. And yet, in quiet moments, worry crept in. I knew my parents, Linda and Richard, would notice when the whole extended family disappeared for the holiday. They would feel betrayed, call me, maybe rage. But I also knew that burden wasn't mine anymore. I was no longer the daughter waiting in the corner for their scraps of approval. I was rewriting the story. One evening, a message arrived from Mark, Emily's husband. Just a few words: "Can we talk privately?" Important. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure what he wanted. Maybe Emily already knew and was pressuring me. But part of me was curious. Mark wasn't blind. He had often given me sympathetic looks whenever favoritism blazed openly. I stared at the glowing screen, finger hovering above the call button. Inside, a storm brewed between caution and the urge to finally hear the truth. Should I bring Emily's family into this trip? Or keep Villa Solace only for those who truly cherished me? I switched off the lights and stood by the window watching Columbus sparkle below. In the glass, I saw a different Piper, no longer trembling from abandonment, but standing before a chance to prove my true worth. Still, I knew one wrong choice could drag me back into the same cycle. One question rang in my head with no answer. Would Villa Solace become the beginning of a new tradition, or the battleground where broken ties exploded more fiercely than ever before? The evening I received Mark's text, I sat staring at my phone for a long while. Finally, I called him back. His voice was cautious but sincere. "Piper, I know you're upset with your parents and maybe with Emily too. But honestly, we don't want another Thanksgiving filled with that pressure. I heard you're hosting in France. Could our family come? The kids would love to see everyone." I stayed silent. My mind spun with memories of all the times Emily took the spotlight while I sat quietly in the corner. If I invited them, would it all happen again? But then I remembered Aunt Ruth's words. In a new place, you can set the rules. No one can impose unless you let them. I drew a deep breath and replied, "Fine. But this time it has to be different. Emily needs to understand this is my space, and I won't let anyone turn it into her stage." Mark exhaled with relief. "I'll make sure she understands." "Thank you, Piper." And just like that, the guest list grew by 4. Emily, Mark, and their kids, Olivia 10 and Max 7. When I told Sophie and Dylan, they were surprised but quickly supportive. Sophie laughed. "I trust you'll handle it. Who knows? In a new setting, everything might change." On departure day, JFK Airport buzzed with excitement. I met each arriving family group, hugs and thank yous spilling over as they shared their relief at escaping those forced holiday gatherings of the past. Then Emily appeared with her kids. My chest tightened, until Olivia ran up and threw her arms around me. "Aunt Piper, I can't wait to see your house in France." Max trotted behind, chattering about all the things he wanted to do at the house on the hill. I blinked in surprise. Maybe, just maybe, the children would be the bridge to ease the distance. The long flight was filled with laughter. Relatives chatted about French scenery and food. Dylan kept cracking jokes until the cabin felt like a party. I glanced at Emily, who sat quiet, smiling faintly now and then. Not the boastful Emily I was used to. When our caravan pulled up to Villa Solis, everyone fell silent. The ivy-clad stone walls, the olive groves, the sunlight washing over tall windows. The sight left them awestruck. Aunt Ruth clasped my hand, eyes glistening. "Piper, you've created something beautiful. This feels like true family." The kids ran wild through the garden, laughing. Sophie and Haley darted around snapping photos. Dylan popped open a bottle of local wine and raised his glass to the start of a brand new tradition. That first night, I cooked a simple meal: herb-roasted chicken, stewed vegetables, and toasted bread with cheese. We gathered around the long kitchen table, chatter and laughter filling the air. What moved me most was that no one mentioned my parents, no one compared me to Emily. Every conversation revolved around shared memories and personal stories, with no hierarchy of who mattered more. Emily stayed quiet at first. But when Olivia proudly showed a drawing she'd made of Villa Solis, Emily glanced at me and whispered, "Piper, your house, it's beautiful. Thank you for letting us come." Just a short sentence, but enough for me to sense she was beginning to see things differently. The next day we explored the village market. Produce, cheeses and wines lay in colorful rows under the autumn sun. Everyone debated what to buy for Thanksgiving dinner. Unlike the old days, no one pushed me to step aside so Emily could choose. Here I was the host, the guide, and everyone respected that. That afternoon, Max and Dylan pitched a small tent in the garden for the kids. Sophie and Haley helped me test a new recipe: turkey stuffed with black truffles and chestnuts. The kitchen filled with laughter and rich aromas. When I turned, I saw Emily standing on the terrace, glass of wine in hand, gazing into the distance. She looked over at me, her voice softer than usual. "Piper, I know you've carried a lot. I don't think I ever really considered your feelings. To think you here. I realize you deserve all of this." I didn't answer right away. I just met her eyes. In that moment, I knew the air had shifted. The heavy weight of favoritism was gone. For the first time, Emily and I stood on equal ground. Two women, not the chosen one and the forgotten one. That night, lying in the villa's master bedroom with moonlight spilling across the floor, I understood this trip wasn't just about reclaiming my worth. It was the start of something bigger. Yet deep inside, I also sensed the storm wasn't over. My parents would soon notice the entire extended family was missing. And when they did, the real confrontation would begin. On the second afternoon at Villa Solis, while everyone was busy setting the long table out on the terrace, the phones began to ring one after another. First Aunt Ruth's, then Dylan's, then even Sophie's. By the time I stepped out of the kitchen, they were all gathered in the living room, faces tense. Aunt Ruth handed me her phone on speaker. My mother's voice, Carol, rang out urgent. Ruth, where is everyone? Why isn't Emily answering? We're sitting here waiting for dinner and nobody has shown up. The room went silent. I drew a deep breath and stepped forward. Mom, it's me. There was a dead pause, then my father, Richard, cut in just as furious. Piper? Where are you? Why would you drag the entire family away like this? Calmly, I answered. I'm at Villa Solace, the house I bought in France. And yes, everyone is here with me. I invited them to celebrate a new kind of Thanksgiving. On the other end, my mother gasped. You what? You bought a house in France? How could no one know? Why keep this from us? I tightened my grip on the phone, my voice steady. Because you never really cared. I wanted to wait for this moment to share it, but then you sent me that message, telling me not to come. So I created my own gathering with people who actually want me there. A heavy silence followed. I expected more accusations, but instead my father let out a bitter laugh. So your revenge is dragging the family across Europe? Piper, you're more selfish than we thought. The accusation made my blood boil. Selfish? I've stepped aside for Emily all these years. I've stayed silent every time I was overlooked. I never asked for anything for myself. And now, when I finally want a rightful place, you call me selfish. My mother's voice quivered. Piper, we only wanted a peaceful holiday. You know Emily gets tired, she needs more care. And I don't. I cut her off, glancing around the villa glowing with warm light. Mom, have you ever asked what I need? Or did you always assume I was too strong to need anyone? The air in the living room grew thick. Aunt Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder to steady me, but I knew I couldn't retreat this time. On the line, my father's tone softened, no longer angry but weighted with disappointment. You've pushed us out. Now the whole family has chosen your side. Does that make you happy? I replied slowly, I never wanted this to be about sides. But you chose to cast me out first. All I've done is take that empty space and turn it into something meaningful. My mother's long sigh carried through the phone before she murmured heavily, You've humiliated us. Everyone will think we're terrible parents. My eyes narrowed, bitter. If they think that, it's because they've seen the truth for years. I don't need to prove it. The line went quiet. Finally, my father spoke. We'll have more to say. But remember this, Piper. You've created a crack that won't be easy to mend. Maybe that crack was already there, I answered, then firmly ended the call. The room sank into silence. Some faces showed worry, but most reflected agreement. Dylan broke the tension with a wry grin. Come on, dinner's waiting. No way we're letting Mom and Dad ruin this meal. Laughter rippled through the group, small but enough to lighten the mood. I sat down, heart still pounding. I knew the fight with my parents was far from over. They had just realized I was no longer the obedient shadow, and surely they would try to pull me back into the old circle. But this time I had an entire family at my back. One I had chosen, and that was the greatest strength I had ever known. That night, as I stood on the balcony watching the moonlight bathe the olive grove, my father's words echoed in my head. You've created a crack that won't be easy to mend. I smiled faintly. Maybe he was right. But sometimes, to build a stronger house, you first have to tear down the rotten walls. After the tense call with my parents, I barely slept that night. But the next morning, as sunlight poured through the French windows, a new feeling stirred in me. No longer the fear of being abandoned, but the calm of someone who had finally spoken the truth she had buried for years. From that moment, I knew nothing would ever return to the way it was. On Thanksgiving Day, Villa Solace overflowed with laughter. Aunt Ruth and Sophie arranged fresh flowers on the long table. Dylan helped the kids decorate with bright maple leaves from the garden, while Haley busily captured every moment with her old camera. No one mentioned Linda or Richard, but the silence wasn't avoidance. It was solidarity. This was my holiday and no one would take it from me. When the meal began, I stood at the head of the table, gazing at each glowing face. Candlelight flickered, the aroma of turkey and black truffles mingled with red wine shimmering like ruby in the glasses. My voice trembled but stayed firm as I raised my glass. Thank you all for being here. This year I thought I'd be eating alone. But because of you, Villa Solace has shown me I am not alone at all. This is the beginning of a new tradition. One where we gather not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect for one another. Glasses clinked and cheers erupted. I turned to Emily and saw her nod slightly, her eyes wet but without the envy I had grown used to. After dinner, as we lined up for a family photo by the terrace, Emily pulled me aside into the garden. She stood silent for a while before saying softly, "Piper, I owe you an apology. For years, I knew Mom and Dad favored me and I let it happen because I benefited. Seeing you today, I finally see how strong you are." I met her gaze. "Emily, I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. If our parents can't give that, then I at least need you to understand." He squeezed my hand. "I do now. And I promise if they try it again, I'll speak up. I won't leave you alone anymore." I smiled, feeling a heavy stone lift from my chest. For so many years, she and I had stood on opposite sides of the scale. But today, for the first time, I felt us standing together. Later that night, as everyone gathered by the fireplace, Dylan suddenly declared, "Piper, do you realize what you've done? You've created a tradition we all want to keep. Next year, even if you don't invite us, we're coming back." The room erupted in laughter, but beneath the humor was truth. Villa Solace was no longer just property. It had become a symbol of change, a place where, for the first time, I was at the center of my family. In the days after, as everyone returned to the US, I hugged each goodbye tightly. Emily held me the longest, whispering, "Let's start over, Piper. For real this time." Back in the quiet villa, I stood on the balcony overlooking the olive grove, thinking of my parents across the ocean. I didn't know if they would ever admit their mistakes, or if they would always see me as too strong to need love. But I knew one thing for certain: I had drawn my boundary and I would never step back again. A year later, as Thanksgiving approached, I sent invitations to everyone. To my surprise, Linda and Richard responded yes. Though hesitant, I accepted. And when they finally stepped into Villa Solace for the first time, the atmosphere was different. No commanding voices, no favoritism in their eyes. My mother simply said, "Piper, you've created something wonderful. We are very proud." I didn't know if they truly meant it. But hearing those words for a fleeting moment, the child in me who had long craved their recognition felt soothed at last. Villa Solace, once only my private dream, had become the bridge that pieced a broken family back together. More than that, it became proof that self-worth is not something given. It is something we must stand up and claim for ourselves. Piper's story isn't just about favoritism within a family. It's a powerful reminder for today. Sometimes blood ties don't guarantee fairness or love. Like Piper, many people in real life have been overlooked or excluded from important moments. But the truth is, we all have the right to create new traditions, a new home built on respect and genuine care. The deeper lesson here: our worth doesn't come from reluctant recognition, but from the way we rise and claim it ourselves. What do you think about Piper's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel to continue exploring heartfelt stories and meaningful lessons about life and family.